I'm going to go over how to reconstitute 2 peptide vials, then transfer them to one pen cartridge, the pen cartridge that we like to use at Peptide Vitality. So the key to this is making sure that you're keeping everything sterile as possible. So before starting the video, I used simple green wipes to clean the surface of the counter, and then I used rubbing alcohol to wipe it down with after. So this surface is ready to be worked with. The supplies that I'm going to use are a 3 ml syringe. It's a luer lock syringe, so the needle detaches from the syringe itself. And then I also have one 25 gauge luer lock needle only. And I actually prefer 27 gauge, but I have 25, so I'm just going to use that for today. And you'll need alcohol wipes, a pen cartridge. This is a 3 ml pen cartridge. And then your peptides. I'm going to be working with BPC 157 combined with TB 500, which is the Wolverine stack. And I have 2 unlabeled vials from our inventory that I'll be working with, but I wanted to make sure you guys just saw that it's the same thing that you guys are getting when you order your peptides from us. And the first step is getting your vial tops ready to be sanitized. So I also am going to be using our bacteriostatic water. I keep it wrapped in tin foil so that I don't expose it to light, but it's just our bacteriostatic water. All right, so I'm going to sanitize the tops of each of the vials by rubbing them with the alcohol wipe, and I have to make sure that I actually get the alcohol to touch the rubber in the center area where the needle is going to puncture the rubber stopper. So one, then I'll pop this one off and do the same thing. This one didn't come off as neatly. Careful with these little aluminum stopper, because they will they'll cut you if you're not careful. There's an arrow on some vials, like this one has an arrow on it at the very top there, and that's where you want to push it up from, and then it'll pull it back nice and clean like that. The other one had one too, I just didn't notice. Some of our vials have them, some of them don't. Okay, so now we've got that set, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the pen cartridge and make sure this whole time that the rubber stoppers are wet from the rubbing alcohol. I don't want them to get skipped over. So now we'll take the syringe, and since I'm going to be pulling water out of this vial, I'm going to push air into it to keep the pressure and vacuum the same. I'm going to be pulling out 3 total milliliters of water, so I'll push a volume of 3 milliliters of air into it as well. And then I'm going to be pushing air in and removing water out of the peptide vials later. So because I'm going to be pushing air in, I'm going to want to pull a little bit out so that it ends up being the same. Ooh, this one has a lot of vacuum. Sometimes you're going to come into some peptide vials like this one that I just tried to pull a little bit and I could tell there was a ton of vacuum. So I'm going to do the opposite here. Look, I need to equalize this vial. When your peptides have a lot of pressure in them, I'm holding the plunger with 2 fingers here, and I'm noticing that, like, look, it's sliding on its own, and I want to control that. So, boom, that's 1.5. Because it's under such pressure, I'm gonna let it take another 1.5. That pressure is sterility, so that pressure is not a bad thing. We'll go 1.5 here and see where we're at. Yep, I can feel it pulling really hard. Because of the amount of vacuum that these vials are under, I ended up putting 3 mils of air volume into it. So now we'll go through and pull the backwater out of the backwater vial. Because of the pressure or the vacuum in the vial, it's filling the syringe without me doing anything. It's just kind of pushing itself in. And then as it kind of slows down, I'll start to pull the plunger. But I'm avoiding creating air bubbles as much as possible. If you go too fast, you'll get more air bubbles. I have a couple of bubbles in here. I'm not too concerned about them. There's a big air gap at the top. You can kind of see that. I don't know if you can see how well you can see it there, but there's an air gap at the top. I'm going to push the plunger through and get rid of that air gap. And there's a couple of small air bubbles left in the syringe. And I'm not too concerned about them. They're smaller bubbles. So I just add a very small, like a little extra backwater to compensate for the space of air that they're taking that could be reconstitution solution. So I'll set that aside. And now I'm going to inject these by holding the plunger between 2 fingers firmly. It'll slip right out from under you when the peptides have a lot of vacuum in them. And I'm going to allow the water to go into the sidewall of the peptide. I don't want to shoot it directly onto the peptide. I released enough of the vacuum that I can gently now push this in. So I want to just let it dribble in and not stream the water directly onto the peptides. I'm going to press in 1.5 milliliters into the first vial, and I'm going to do the same thing on the next one. So I'm just splitting the 3 mils between the 2 vials. This is beautiful. It's almost done dissolving. Those are good peptides. And I'll do the same thing with this one. Kind of see the rate of speed that the rubber stopper and the syringe is moving. I'm going slow and steady. You can't really go too slow, but you can go too fast. All right, so watch how I recap the syringe. I'm not going to pick it up and put it right over the needle. You'll learn that lesson the hard way once and you'll never forget. So you just lie down the cap and you use the needle from the syringe to slide into it, and then you put it on safely like that. Okay, so that's the trick to getting that back on. So I have 2 peptides that are almost done dissolving on their own here. If I wanted to, I could just let these peptides sit here for a while and they'll dissolve by themselves, but I'm going to swirl them to help them dissolve a little bit faster. I don't want to shake them. I can barrel roll them as well. All right, so I'm just careful not to shake these up. I think that probably if you have to choose between swirling and barrel rolling, swirling is probably better because your hands don't warm up the vial. But I have found that it hasn't made a difference with my reconstitutions. But swirling is nice. So sometimes if I want it to be sideways, sometimes the peptides will stick to the bottom of the vial, and I'll just barrel roll it this way without putting my fingers all over the vial. It's another technique that works pretty well. This one has finished dissolving. It's crystal clear. This one is nearly done. I want to make sure that there's no, I guess like little floaters, particulate matter in there. I want it to be fully dissolved. So now this is fully dissolved as well. So we have 2 peptide vials that are done dissolving, and we're going to transfer them into the pen cartridge. I got this little cartridge holder. It's actually, I think, for vape pens, but I got this cartridge holder on Amazon for I think $6 or $7, and it's perfect. It fits the cartridges just right. If I didn't have it, I would be standing it up this way and it tips over really easily. And I just don't want to break them. So this brand is called Designs 3D, Designs with a Z and then 3D. So they're on Amazon. There's a bunch of really fancy ones on there too. I don't use any of those. There's like anodized aluminum and whatever, but I just need the basics. This works really well for our purpose. So now I'm taking one of the needles and just puncturing it through the top of the rubber stopper here on the cartridge. This lets the pressure that's inside of the cartridge release. If I don't do this and then I press in the peptides, the rubber stopper at the bottom can blow out. We've had that happen to a few people in our group, so I just want to point that out. All right, now that this is in here, I can bend this a little bit if I want to, just to kind of get it out of the way so that when I pick up the peptides again out of the vial that they're in, I have a little more room to work with. So now I'm going to puncture the needle in, and I'm going to slowly draw it out. Here's another reason why I like working with the 3 ml syringe for reconstitution rather than an insulin syringe. A 3 ml syringe has a thick enough needle at 25 gauges to hold the vial steady without flopping over. An insulin syringe can't do that. Usually you end up bending the needle on those because they're just so thin. Like a 30 gauge or 31 gauge needle just can't do this. So I'm drawing it slowly. And my needle height is above the height of the water in the vial, so I'm just going to lower it so I can continue to draw the rest of the peptides out. Okay, that's awesome. I got everything out of this one. That was perfect. Now I'm going to transfer it into the cartridge. I don't have to worry about pressure here because there's that exhaust valve trick that we're using the other needle for. But I am just going to spray it into the sidewall slowly. I have an air bubble in there, not a big deal. If I wanted to, I could have pushed it out, but it's not going to make a difference because at the end, we end up bleeding the air out of this cartridge. There's going to be an air gap no matter what, so I'm not worried about it. Okay, we'll do the same thing with this one. I'm just drawing slowly to not create air bubbles unnecessarily. You draw fast and you'll get really small air bubbles that become a larger air bubble. So just try to keep this super steady on the pool, and then I'm going to lower the needle inside the vial to make sure it's nice and low and not above the height of the peptide level in the vial. So I can draw all the last bits of it. I have a big air gap on this one. So because it's so large, I can push that one out slowly by pressing the plunger. Don't want to waste the peptide, so I just push it up until I see it in the orange section. There it is, I saw it move in the orange section, so I just stopped that. That happens really fast. So now I'll push this one into the same cartridge, We already have 1.5 milliliters of peptides in there. Now we're putting 1.5 more in there. Okay, so pull this guy out. And again, the trick to putting this cap on is not by just shoving it on. We just set it down, scoop it up. Okay, sometimes when you're doing this trick here, if your needle is too low, it'll go into the peptides as the peptides come up. And then as you press in peptides from the syringe, the pressure will push the peptides out the needle, and you'll start to lose some peptides through this needle. So just make sure that this needle isn't set too deeply. You want it up high. You can kind of see how, maybe in this video, you might be able to see the height of where that level is. I mean, it's pretty up there. It's just below the stopper. Okay. So now we have this part done. And we're going to use the same trick here to recap this needle. So now we have 3 mils of the Wolverine stack inside of 1 3 mil cartridge. This is going to last, I don't know, maybe 4 weeks. Some people 5 weeks, some people maybe 3.5 weeks or so, depending on your dosage. But this is going to be enough to last for a few weeks. You'll see that there are some bubbles in there, the really small ones, and there's an air gap at the top. We're going to remove that now. We take one of the universal pen needles. I use a 31 gauge. Not that one, that's a thick one. This one right here. This is a 31 gauge, 4 millimeter. This is perfect. This is exactly what you want for your peptide subcutaneous administrations. With the pen that we have, you can use this needle and it'll only go below the layer of skin and right into the subcutaneous administration area of fat. It's going to be really hard for this thing to reach a muscle tissue unless you're in a really shallow area like near your elbows, where when I had my tendonitis and bursitis, I was pinning right by my elbow and I was getting into the muscle a little bit. But even then, it didn't get into the muscle that much. You want to get into the fat with these. And so this is going to be just long enough to get into or through the skin and into that fat layer right below the skin. In some cases where there isn't much fat to pinch, if you're doing a local administration, I find that I don't even need to pinch. I can just press the pen and then push the plunger through, and it's a perfect administration. So that's a little trick that I do. All right, so I'm gonna put this on one of the pens. We love pens. Okay, sometimes when you get your pen, some people think they need to screw this thing off like this. And then it's like, oh, there's no cartridge holder in here. And it's because you screwed it off. So don't screw it off. You just slide this off. And then you screw on your needle. Okay, so for our purposes, we take this cartridge holder out, put the cartridge inside of it, depress the plunger back inside, and screw this on. You'll have to use a little bit of pressure to get this to thread in. So I'm kind of squeezing here as I turn it. Okay, once you get it to thread, then it's pretty easy. It's plastic, threading onto metal, so you don't want to torque this thing really hard. All right, so this is now ready for the universal pen needle, and I just screw it on. Pull it off. And the air gap that I have in there is still in there. It's hard to see, but it's there. And so I have to remove the air gap, and I purge it by turning the dial. There's a dial here on the pens, right? So I'm going to turn that dial to 2 clicks, the number 2, and then I push it up. I have to keep the pen vertical. If I don't keep the pen vertical, the air bubble goes to the side, and then when I try to purge and push the air out, it's only going to push peptides out, and the bubble's stuck over here on the side. So I have to keep it vertical, and I kind of just tap it just to make sure I can see where the bubble is, and it's centered and right underneath the needle. So now that I've turned this 2 notches, I just push it up. no peptides came out. I'm gonna do it again, push it up. One drop of peptide came out there. I don't think that I got the whole bubble. I can see it still. So I'm gonna do it again. I had some peptides and some air come up. So I'm gonna go down to just one push at a time, one click. Okay, and I'm gonna go one more. Okay, let's see if I got that bubble out. I did. All right, good. So that's how you purge it. It's pretty simple. This is now ready to get, you can do an administration with this now. So you turn the dial to the dose that you want to administer. So if you're going to, I don't know, if you're gonna hit, what's the calculation? It's 67 micrograms per unit. And so if you wanted to hit 670 micrograms, then you would turn the dial to the dose that corresponds with that, which is going to be, I think, around like 9 or 10. You use Pep-Calc. It's an app you can download on your phone to calculate that. And you determine what your dose is, and then you can use this sleeve or not. I used to use the sleeve, but needles don't freak me out. And so it was just actually blocking the spot where I was going to pin. So now I just run it this way, and I'll press it against my skin, injecting it, and I want the base of the needle holder, the plastic area, to touch my skin. And then I just press this button down and it pushes the peptides through. And when I release my thumb, I don't pull out the pen injector. I keep it in place for 10 seconds. I need to hold it in place for 10 seconds total. And then once the 10 seconds are up, I pull it out and my administration is finished.